The sun rose over London on a special day. It was May 6, 2023, the day when King Charles II would be crowned. The city was full of color. Red, white, and blue flags hung from buildings and lined the streets. People from all over the world came to see this big event. Inside Kensington Palace, the home of Prince William and Princess Catherine, everyone woke up early. Today was not just any day. It was a day that would go down in history books. William, who would one day be king himself, felt both excited and serious. This was his father's big moment. Kate woke up first. She went to the window and looked out at the beautiful morning. She could already see crowds gathering in the distance. She took a deep breath and thought about the day ahead. Her 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, would all be at the coronation. They needed to be on their best behavior. Soon, the palace was busy with activity. Helpers moved quickly through the halls. They carried fine clothes, shiny shoes, and small tiaras. The smell of breakfast filled the air as the family began to eat together at a big table. "Will there be lots of people, Mummy?" asked 5-year-old Prince Louis, his mouth full of toast. "Yes, darling," said Kate with a smile. "More people than you can count." "And I have to carry Grandpa's robe," said 9-year-old Prince George. His face looked worried. "What if I trip?" William put his hand on his son's shoulder. "You won't trip, George. We've practiced many times. You'll make us all very proud." 7-year-old Princess Charlotte sat up straight in her chair. "I'll help Louis stay quiet," she said in a grown-up voice. Even at her young age, Charlotte understood royal duties well. After breakfast, it was time to get dressed. Helpers came to each room. For Kate, there was a team of people to help with her hair, makeup, and dress. She chose a beautiful white outfit with special meaning. On it were flowers that stood for England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. She also wore jewelry that once belonged to Princess Diana, William's mother, who had died many years ago. William put on his military uniform. It was covered in medals and golden rope. He looked in the mirror and fixed his collar. Then he went to check on the children. In George's room, the young prince was trying to stand still. A helper was putting on his page of honor outfit. It was red and gold, the royal colors. His shoes were so shiny he could see his face in them. "You look just like I did when I was your age," William told him. "I was a page at a big wedding once." In Charlotte's room, the princess was sitting very still. A woman was fixing her hair with small white flowers. Her dress was white and silver, like a mini version of her mother's outfit. "Remember, Charlotte," said William, "you are very good at royal events. Keep an eye on Louis, please." Charlotte nodded. She was proud to be the responsible middle child. The most difficult was little Louis. He couldn't stop jumping on his bed, even in his fancy blue clothes. "Louis," Kate said as she came into the room, "today is very important. You must try to be still and quiet at the church." "Like a statue?" Louis asked. "Well, maybe not that still," Kate laughed. But no funny faces at the cameras this time. Outside, they could hear the sound of horses. The royal carriages had arrived to take them to Westminster Abbey. Through the palace windows, they saw crowds of people lining the streets. Some had camped out all night just to get a good spot. William gathered his family in the grand hallway. They stood together for a moment, a picture of royal dignity. Kate straightened Louis's little tie one last time. "Ready?" William asked. They all nodded. It was time to be part of history. The family walked together toward the palace doors, ready to step out into the bright day and the cheering crowds. The royal family stepped outside Kensington Palace. 4 beautiful carriages waited for them. These were not normal carriages. They were golden and shiny, pulled by white horses with special red and gold covers. People who worked for the royal family stood nearby in bright red uniforms. "Look at the horses," Louis shouted. He pulled away from Kate and ran toward them. William quickly caught his youngest son's hand. "Careful, Louis. The horses are very big." A man helped William, Kate, and the children into the second carriage. The seats inside were soft red velvet. Gold designs covered the walls. Small windows with glass let them see outside. "Wave to the people," Kate told the children as the carriage began to move. The horses' shoes made a clip-clop sound on the road. Police on motorcycles drove in front and behind them. The family's carriage joined a long line of other carriages. This was the royal parade to Westminster Abbey. People lined both sides of the street. They cheered and took pictures. Some held up signs that said, "God save the King," or "We love you, Charlotte." Many people waved small British flags. "There are so many people," George said. He waved through the window. Charlotte sat very straight and gave her best royal wave. She had practiced it many times. Louis bounced on his seat, waving with both hands. "Look, Mummy, they know my name," Louis said when he heard people call out to him. The carriage rolled slowly through London. They passed famous places like Buckingham Palace and Big Ben. Everywhere they went, crowds cheered for them. Inside the carriage, William told the children about the coronation. "This ceremony is very old," he explained. "Kings and queens have done this same thing for almost 1,000 years. "Will Grandpa sit in the special chair?" asked Charlotte. "Yes, the coronation chair," William answered. "It was made over 700 years ago." "That's really old," said Louis with big eyes. "And George will help carry Grandpa's robe," said Kate, smiling at her oldest son. George looked nervous but proud. He sat up straighter. As they got closer to Westminster Abbey, the crowds grew even bigger. People had camped on the street all night just to see the royal family pass by. Some people cried with happiness when they saw the princes and princess. The abbey came into view. It was an enormous stone church with tall pointed towers. It looked very old because it was built hundreds of years ago. Many important events had happened there, like weddings and funerals of kings and queens. The carriage stopped at the abbey's big doors. Guards in red uniforms and tall black furry hats stood on both sides. They held long, shiny swords. A man in a fancy uniform opened the carriage door. He bowed to William and Kate. "Your Royal Highnesses," he said. William stepped out first. He turned to help Kate, who looked beautiful in her white dress. The three children followed. They stood for a moment at the bottom of the steps. Cameras flashed all around them. "Remember," Kate whispered to the children, "walk slowly and smile." The family began to walk up the steps. George and Charlotte moved carefully. Louis held tightly to Kate's hand, looking around with wide eyes at all the people. Inside the door of Westminster Abbey, they stopped again. The sound of music came from inside. They could hear a choir singing. A man in long black and gold robes greeted them. This was the Dean of Westminster. He would help lead the coronation. "Welcome, Your Royal Highnesses," he said with a bow. "We are ready to begin the service." William looked at his family. This was a big moment for all of them. George would have an important job. Charlotte and Louis would need to sit quietly for a long time. Kate squeezed his hand. More important guests arrived behind them. There were other royals, prime ministers, and famous people from all over the world. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes. The Dean led William and his family through the church. People stood and bowed as they passed. The inside of Westminster Abbey was huge and beautiful. Tall stone columns reached up to the ceiling. Colorful windows let in light. Flowers and gold decorations were everywhere. At last, they'd reached their special seats near the front. From here, they would watch King Charles be crowned. The coronation was about to begin. The royal family sat in their special seats in Westminster Abbey. The seats had red cushions with gold trim. Kate made sure Louis sat between her and Charlotte. This way, both of them could help keep him quiet. George sat next to William, ready to perform his important duty as page of honor. The abbey was filled with 300 special guests. They all turned to look as a loud trumpet sound filled the air. The main doors opened wide. King Charles II and Queen Camilla had arrived. "There's Grandpa," whispered Charlotte to Louis, who was trying to stand on his seat to see better. "Sit down, please," Kate said softly to Louis. He sat, but his legs swung back and forth with excitement. The king and queen walked slowly down the long aisle. They wore heavy red robes with white fur. A group of important people walked with them. These included other royal pages, church leaders, and people carrying special objects for the ceremony. When it was time, George stood up. William gave his son a small nod. The young prince walked perfectly to join the other pages. Together, they helped carry the king's long, heavy robe. George's face was serious. He was careful with each step. "Look at George," Charlotte said proudly to Louis. "He's doing a royal job." Louis watched his big brother with wide eyes. He tried to sit still like Charlotte, but it was hard for him. The ceremony began with singing and prayers. Some of the words were very old, from hundreds of years ago. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the most important church leader in England, led the service. He wore gold and white robes. During a quiet part of the ceremony, Louis leaned over to Kate. "Money, how much longer?" He whispered a bit too loudly. A few people nearby smiled. Kate put her finger to her lips. Then she reached into her small bag and took out a tiny toy car. She had brought it just in case Louis got bored. Louis took the car and played with it quietly on his lap. The most important part of the ceremony came next. King Charles sat in the coronation chair. This wooden chair was made in the year 1300. Almost every king and queen since then had sat in it for their coronation. The archbishop placed a heavy gold crown on the king's head. This was Street Edward's crown. It was covered in jewels and very old. At this moment, everyone in the abbey stood up. They all said together, "God save the king." George stood extra tall as he said the words. He looked at his grandfather with pride. One day, George would be king too. William put his hand on his son's shoulder, feeling proud of his son and moved by the moment. The crown on King Charles's head sparkled in the light from the tall windows. Music filled the air as a choir sang. Louis was so surprised by the loud sounds that he stopped playing with his toy car. He stared at his grandfather, looking amazed. After the crown was placed, there were more prayers and songs. Then the king and queen moved to different chairs. These were throne chairs, covered in gold. When they sat down, all the important people in the abbey came forward one by one. They knelt before the king and queen to show respect. First came Prince William. He walked to his father, the king. William knelt down and said words that promised to serve and support the king. Then William touched his father's crown lightly and kissed him on the cheek. It was a moment between father and son, but also between a prince and his king. From their seats, Kate and the children watched. Charlotte sat perfectly straight, copying her mother's pose. Louis had finally settled down, impressed by the grand ceremony. He held his mother's hand tightly. The ceremony continued with more traditions. Special oil was put on the king's hands, chest, and head. This was called the anointing. It was so sacred that they held up screens so people couldn't see it happen. William returned to his seat beside his family. Kate gave him a small, loving smile. Together, they watched the rest of the ancient ceremony that made Charles the new king of the United Kingdom. The coronation ceremony continued for another hour. There were more songs, prayers, and special moments. Even adults found it hard to sit still for so long. For the royal children, it was a real test. Prince Louis tried his best to be good. But after sitting for such a long time, he began to yawn. His little mouth opened wide, and he didn't cover it with his hand. People who saw it smiled. Louis was just being a normal 5-year-old boy. Kate noticed and gently tapped his knee. She whispered something in his ear. Louis nodded and sat up straighter again. Charlotte, who sat on his other side, held his hand to help him stay still. George had returned to his seat after helping with the king's robe. He watched everything with serious eyes. William could see that his son was taking mental notes. George knew that someday, many years in the future, this would be his ceremony. He would be the one sitting in that ancient chair, wearing that heavy crown. A special part of the ceremony was when Queen Camilla was crowned. Her crown was smaller than the king's but still beautiful. It had diamonds that once belonged to Queen Victoria from almost 200 years ago. "Look at the Queen's crown," Kate whispered to Charlotte. "Isn't it pretty?" Charlotte nodded, her eyes wide at the sparkling jewels. After both the king and queen were crowned, there was a moment when everyone in the abbey was completely quiet. Then music began to play. It was a new song written just for this day. The choir of men and boys in white robes sang with beautiful voices. During the music, Louis began to get restless again. He wiggled in his seat and started to look around at the ceiling of the abbey. "Look up there," he said to Charlotte, pointing at the high ceiling. Charlotte tried to get him to put his arm down, but Louis was too excited. "But look," he said again, louder this time. William gave his youngest son a look that meant behave. Louis saw it and quickly put his hand down. He tried to copy George's serious face, which made Kate hide a smile behind her hand. The ceremony moved to its final parts. King Charles and Queen Camilla stood up from their throne chairs. They were going to walk out of the abbey wearing their crowns and carrying special golden sticks called scepters. Before they left, the king and queen stopped near William, Kate, and the children. King Charles, now wearing his crown, gave a special smile to his grandchildren. He even winked at Louis, who giggled in surprise. The abbey filled with music again. The king and queen began to walk back down the long aisle. Everyone stood as they passed. "Stand up straight," Kate reminded the children as they got to their feet. George stood tall like his father. Charlotte kept her hands neatly in front of her. Louis bounced a little on his toes, trying to see over the tall people in front of him. As the king and queen walked by, William bowed his head. Kate did a small curtsy. The children copied their parents, George and Charlotte very properly, and Louis with an extra deep bow that almost made him fall over. Kate quickly caught his arm. After the king and queen left the abbey, it was time for the rest of the royal family to leave too. They would go in order of importance. Since William was next in line to be king, his family would go first after some other royal relatives. "Now we walk just like we practiced," William told the children. "Remember to smile and wave to people when we go outside." The family joined the line of people leaving. They walked slowly down the same aisle where the king and queen had just gone. The floor was covered with a red carpet. On both sides, people watched and took pictures. Outside Westminster Abbey, the sky had turned blue. The rain from earlier had stopped. A huge crowd waited to see the royal family. When William, Kate, and the children appeared at the top of the steps, people cheered loudly. "Wave to everyone," Kate reminded the children. The family stood for a moment at the top of the steps. Camera flashes went off everywhere. The children waved, George politely, Charlotte gracefully, and Louis with big, excited movements of both arms. It was time to get into carriages again. This time, they would ride to Buckingham Palace for the next part of this special day. The ride from Westminster Abbey to Buckingham Palace was even more exciting than the first journey. The streets were packed with more people than before. Everyone wanted to see the newly crowned king and queen, and the royal family too. This time, William and Kate's carriage was closer to the king's carriage. People cheered loudly when they saw the family. Many called out the children's names. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, Prince Louis, the crowd shouted. Louis was now full of energy again. The long ceremony was over, and he could be more like his normal self. He waved so hard that William had to hold his arm down a bit. "Not too wild, Louis," William said with a smile. The carriage moved slowly through the streets of London. Rain had threatened earlier, but now the sun was shining. It made the gold on the carriages sparkle. "Look, a rainbow," Charlotte said, pointing to the sky. Sure enough, a beautiful rainbow curved over the city. People in the crowd pointed at it too. Some said it was a good sign for the new king. "Grandpa made a rainbow," Louis said, making everyone in the carriage laugh. As they got closer to Buckingham Palace, they could see the famous balcony. This was where the royal family would stand later to wave to everyone. It was a tradition after big royal events. The carriage rolled through the tall gates of Buckingham Palace. Guards in red coats and tall black furry hats stood at attention. They did not smile or move, even when Louis waved right at them. "Why don't they wave back?" Louis asked. "They're working," Kate explained. "Their job is to stand very still and protect the palace." In the large courtyard inside the palace gates, the carriages stopped. Helpers in fancy uniforms opened the doors. William stepped out first, then helped Kate and the children. Inside Buckingham Palace, everything was busy. Workers rushed around. Some carried trays of food and drinks. Others arranged chairs and fixed flowers. Everyone was getting ready for the big party that would happen after the balcony appearance. The family was led to a special room to wait. Other royal family members were there too, aunts, uncles, and cousins. Everyone was talking about the ceremony. "You did so well, George," said an aunt, patting him on the shoulder. "I was nervous," George admitted, "but I remembered all the steps." Charlotte stood near a window, looking out at the crowds. "There are so many people," she said, "more than at school sports day." Louis had found some small cookies on a table. He was eating them quickly before anyone noticed. Kate saw him and shook her head, but she was smiling. It had been a long day for a 5-year-old. A palace worker came into the room. 5 minutes until the balcony appearance," he announced. William gathered his family. "Almost done," he told them. "Just a few more minutes of being on your best behavior." Kate straightened George's uniform and fixed Charlotte's hair. She wiped cookie crumbs from Louis's face with a small cloth she kept in her bag. "Remember," she told Louis, "just a few minutes of standing still and waving. Then we can relax." Louis nodded seriously. "I'll be good," he promised. The family walked through the grand hallways of the palace. The walls were covered with famous paintings. Soft red carpets ran down the middle of the floors. Crystal lights hung from the ceilings. They reached the room that led to the balcony. King Charles and Queen Camilla were already there. The king had changed his crown for a smaller one that was lighter to wear. The queen looked tired but happy. "Ah, here they are," said King Charles when he saw William, Kate, and the children. "My wonderful family." He gave each grandchild a hug. When he got to Louis, he whispered something that made the little boy laugh. "What did Grandpa say?" Charlotte asked her brother. "He said I did a good job not falling asleep," Louis told her. Big glass doors led to the balcony. Outside, they could hear the crowd chanting, "We want the king. We want the king." A palace official checked his watch. "It's time, Your Majesty," he said to King Charles. The king nodded. The glass doors were opened. Bright sunlight streamed in. The rainbow still curved over London. King Charles and Queen Camilla stepped out first onto the famous balcony. The sound of cheering grew much louder. Then it was time for William, Kate, and the children to join them. William, Kate, and the children stepped onto the balcony of Buckingham Palace. The sight below them was amazing. Thousands and thousands of people filled the mall, the wide road that leads to the palace. The crowd looked like a sea of red, white, and blue. People waved flags and cheered so loudly it was hard to hear anything else. "Wow," said George, his eyes wide. Louis's mouth fell open in surprise. He had never seen so many people in one place. Charlotte waved right away, remembering her royal duties even when surprised. The family stood in perfect order on the balcony. King Charles and Queen Camilla were in the middle. William, Kate, and the children stood to their right. Other important royal family members stood to their left. Louis tugged on Kate's dress and pointed up. "Look," he said. Everyone looked up. Military airplanes were flying over the palace. This was called a flypast. It was a special honor for important royal events. First came helicopters, then bigger planes. They flew in special shapes. The best part came last. Jets called the Red Arrows flew past. leaving trails of red, white, and blue smoke behind them. These were the colors of the British flag. The smoke made perfect straight lines across the blue sky. Lewis jumped up and down with excitement. "Planes," he shouted. This time, nobody told him to be quiet. Even the king laughed at Lewis's joy. The crowd below loved seeing the young prince so happy. They cheered even louder. Some people took pictures and videos of Lewis's excited face. Charlotte watched the planes with a big smile, but she remembered to keep waving too. George stood tall like his father, looking very princely, but even he couldn't help pointing when the red arrows flew over. Kate put her arm around Lewis to keep him from getting too wild. The little prince had been so good during the long ceremony. Now he could show his excitement. When the last plane disappeared, the crowd kept cheering. The royal family stood together for a few more minutes. They waved to the people below. Cameras flashed everywhere. This picture of the royal family on the balcony would be in newspapers all around the world. King Charles turned to speak to William. The two men, father and son, shared a special look. One day, William would be king. And after him, little George would wear the crown. 3 generations of future kings stood together on that balcony. After about 10 minutes, it was time to go back inside. The family gave one last wave to the happy crowd. Then they walked back through the glass doors into the palace. Once inside, everyone relaxed. Lewis ran straight to a chair and jumped onto it. Charlotte laughed at her little brother. George took off his heavy uniform jacket. "You were all wonderful," Kate told the children. "I'm so proud of you." "Even me?" asked Lewis. "I tried to sit still." "Especially you," said William, picking him up. "It's hard for a 5-year-old to be quiet for so long." Palace workers brought drinks and snacks for everyone. The adults had tea and champagne. The children had juice and small sandwiches with no crusts. After the long, exciting day, everyone was hungry. King Charles came over to where William and his family were sitting. He had changed out of his heavy robes into a simpler suit. The small crown was gone too. "I wanted to thank you all," the king said. "George, you carried that heavy robe perfectly. Charlotte, you were so well behaved. And Lewis." The king smiled at his youngest grandson. "Lewis, you reminded everyone that even on serious days, we need some joy." Lewis grinned and took a big bite of his sandwich. More royal guests came into the room. Some had traveled from other countries to see the coronation. They wore their own royal clothes and jewels. The children looked at them with interest. People from Spain, Denmark, Japan, and many other places had come to honor the new king. A photographer asked the royal family to gather for one more picture. This one would not be seen by the public. It was just for the family to keep. They stood together near a window where the light was good. William and Kate behind the children. George in the middle, with Charlotte and Lewis on either side. "Smile," said the photographer. The family smiled. Not their public smiles, but real, happy ones. It had been a long, special day that none of them would ever forget. After the photos and snacks, it was time for the big coronation lunch. This was not a normal lunch. It was a special meal for about 300 important people who had been at the ceremony. The lunch was held in the largest room in Buckingham Palace, called the ballroom. William and Kate took the children to freshen up before the lunch. In a private room, Kate helped Charlotte fix her hair. Some of the flowers had fallen out during the exciting day. George took off his page of honor uniform and put on a simple but smart suit. Lewis changed into clean clothes too. His outfit had gotten a bit messy from all the excitement. "Do we have to sit still again?" Lewis asked, making a sad face. "Just for the lunch," Kate said. "But you can talk to people at our table, and there will be dessert." Lewis's face brightened at the word dessert. He loved sweet things. When they entered the ballroom, it looked magical. Long tables were covered with white cloths. Gold plates and cups sat on top. Flowers in the colors of the British flag, red, white, and blue, filled the center of each table. Tall candles gave the room a warm glow. The family was shown to a special table near the front. King Charles and Queen Camilla sat at the middle table. William, Kate, and the children were at a table just to the right. All around them sat very important people. There were kings and queens from other countries. There were leaders like prime ministers and presidents. There were famous people who had done great things. "Who is that lady?" Charlotte asked, pointing to a woman in a beautiful blue dress. "That's the Queen of Spain," Kate told her. "And next to her is the King of Sweden." Charlotte's eyes grew wide. She did not meet other royal children very often. On this special day, royals from all over Europe were here. George was talking to a boy about his age at their table. He was the son of a European prince. The two boys talked about football and video games, just like normal children. Louis was busy looking at his gold plate. He could see his face in it, all funny and upside down. He made silly faces until Kate gently tapped his hand. "Best behavior," she reminded him. When everyone was seated, King Charles stood up. The room went quiet. He made a short speech thanking everyone for coming to his coronation. People clapped when he finished. Then servers brought the food. It was fancy but had simple choices for the children. Louis was happy to see chicken and potatoes on his plate. Charlotte tried a bit of everything. George ate neatly, copying his father's good manners. During the meal, many people came to speak to William and Kate. They all said nice things about the children. "Your son George did a wonderful job as page of honor," said one lady in a big hat. "Princess Charlotte is so well behaved," said another man in a military uniform. "And Prince Louis, he brings such joy," said a woman with a kind smile. The children tried to use their best manners as people kept coming to their table. It was hard work being royal, even for the youngest ones. For dessert, there was a special coronation ice cream. It was red, white, and blue, with a small gold crown made of sugar on top. Louis's eyes grew big when he saw it. "This is the best part of being a prince," he whispered to Charlotte, who giggled. After they finished eating, a small orchestra began to play music. It was not dancing music, just nice background sounds. The king and queen moved around the room, talking to all their guests. William leaned over to Kate. "The children have done so well today," he said, "but I think Louis is getting tired." Kate looked at their youngest son. He was trying not to yawn. His eyes looked heavy. Even Charlotte was leaning against her chair, and George kept blinking to stay awake. It had been a very long day. They had woken up early and had so much excitement. Now, as afternoon turned to evening, the children were ready for some quiet time. William caught the eye of a palace helper and gave a small nod. It was time for the children to leave the lunch and rest before the evening events. The palace helper led William, Kate, and the children out of the ballroom through a special door. This way, they did not have to say goodbye to everyone. The lunch would continue without them. William would return later, but Kate would stay with the children. They walked through quiet hallways of the palace. These were private areas where tourists never went. Old paintings hung on the walls. Soft carpet covered the floors. Guards stood at certain doors and bowed as the family passed. "My feet hurt," Louis said, dragging his feet a little. William picked him up without a word. The little prince put his head on his father's shoulder. His eyes were already closing. They came to a set of rooms kept ready for them when they visited Buckingham Palace. Though they lived at Kensington Palace, these rooms were like a second home. "You can all rest now," Kate told the children. "You've done so well today." George went straight to a comfortable chair and sat down with a big sigh. He had carried the heavy robe and stood still for hours. Now he could relax. Charlotte kicked off her shoes and wiggled her toes with relief. "Would you like to watch some TV?" Kate asked. Even royal children enjoyed normal things like television after a long day. "Yes, please," the three children said together. Kate turned on a children's show. The bright colors and silly characters were very different from the serious ceremony they had been part of all day. Louis, now fully awake again at the sight of his favorite show, sat cross-legged on the floor close to the screen. William changed out of his formal clothes into a simple suit. He would need to go back to the lunch and then attend more coronation events that evening. "I'm proud of all of you," he told the children before leaving. "Especially you, George. You did your duty perfectly." George smiled at his father's praise. Being a good page of honor had been important to him. After William left, Kate also changed into more comfortable clothes. She ordered tea and sandwiches to be brought to their rooms. The children were hungry again, even after the big lunch. While they ate their small meal, Kate and the children talked about the day. "Did you see how heavy the crown looked on Grandpa's head?" Charlotte asked. "It weighs a lot," Kate told them. "The Street Edwards crown is made of solid gold and covered with jewels." "Will Daddy wear that crown one day?" George asked quietly. He knew that his father would be king someday, and then he would be next. "Yes," Kate said, "and many years later, you will too." George looked serious. Louis, who didn't fully understand, patted his brother's arm. "I'll help carry your robe," Louis offered. This made everyone laugh. After they finished their tea, the children got ready for bed, even though it was still early evening. The excitement of the day had made them very tired. They put on pajamas and brushed their teeth. Kate read them a story, not about kings and queens, but about a talking bear who loved honey. It was nice to hear a simple story after such a big day. Charlotte fell asleep first, then Louis. George stayed awake a little longer. "Money," he said as Kate tucked him in. "Did I do well today?" "You did wonderfully," Kate told him. Everyone was so impressed. "It felt important," George said, "like I was part of history." "You were," Kate said, smoothing his hair. "This day will be in history books, and you helped make it special." George smiled and closed his eyes. Soon he was asleep too. Kate sat in a chair nearby, watching her children sleep. The room was quiet except for their soft breathing. Outside, she could hear music and voices. The celebrations for the coronation would go on late into the night. In the quiet room, with her children safely asleep, Kate thought about the day. It had been full of old traditions and ceremony, but it had also been a family day. A grandfather becoming king, a father supporting him, and children learning about their future roles. William would be back late that night. Tomorrow, they would return to their normal life at Kensington Palace. The children would go back to school, with amazing stories to tell their friends. But tonight, they slept peacefully. 3 young royals who had played their part in a historic day for their country and their family. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains of their rooms at Buckingham Palace. Kate woke up first. William had returned very late from the coronation concert and other events. He was still sleeping soundly beside her. She got up quietly and checked on the children. All 3 were still asleep, tired from yesterday's excitement. Kate smiled as she looked at them. Louis had kicked off his blankets as usual. Charlotte slept neatly, her hands folded like a little princess even in sleep. George lay on his back, looking serious even while dreaming. Kate went to the window and looked out at London. The city was quiet this early in the morning. Some workers were cleaning up the mall where thousands of people had stood yesterday. Flags and decorations still hung from buildings. The whole country had celebrated their new king. Soon, Louis woke up. He was always the first child awake. "Is it still the coronation?" he asked sleepily, rubbing his eyes. "No, sweetheart," Kate said. "That was yesterday. Today we go home." One by one, the others woke up. The family had breakfast together in their private rooms. They talked about their favorite parts of yesterday. "I liked the planes best," Louis said, his mouth full of toast. "I liked meeting the other royal children," said Charlotte. She had made friends with a princess from Denmark. "I'm glad I didn't drop the robe," George said. That had been his biggest worry. William smiled at his family. "You were all perfect," he said. "The newspapers this morning are full of pictures of you." A palace helper brought in some newspapers to show them. The front pages all had pictures of the royal family. There was a beautiful photo of them on the balcony. Another showed George helping with the king's robe. One newspaper had a funny picture of Louis yawning during the ceremony. "Oh no," Louis said when he saw it, but he was smiling. "Everyone thinks you're charming," Kate told him. They remember that sitting still for hours is hard for a 5-year-old. After breakfast, they packed their things. They would return to Kensington Palace, their main home in London. The children were excited to get back to their own rooms and toys. Before they left, King Charles asked to see them. They went to his private study, a room full of books and papers. The king was at his desk, already working even though it was the day after his coronation. "Ah, my wonderful family," he said, standing up to greet them. The king had small gifts for each child. For George, there was a special pen with the royal crest on it. For Charlotte, a small jewelry box with her initials. For Louis, a wooden toy soldier painted to look like a palace guard. To remember this special weekend, the king told them. The children thanked their grandfather. Even Louis remembered to say thank you without being reminded. "You have made me very proud," King Charles told them. Not just yesterday, but every day. He gave each child a hug and kiss. Then he hugged William and Kate too. "Safe journey home," he said as they left his study. The family walked through the palace one last time. Workers were still cleaning up from yesterday's events. Some nodded and smiled as the family passed. Outside, a less fancy car than yesterday's carriage waited for them. Their bags were loaded by helpers. The children got into the back seat, fastening their seat belts like normal children. As they drove away from Buckingham Palace, people on the street recognized the car. Some waved and took pictures with their phones. "Wave back," Kate reminded the children. They rolled down their windows a little and waved to the people. The car turned onto the main road toward Kensington Palace. Louis looked back at Buckingham Palace getting smaller behind them. "Will we come back for another coronation soon?" he asked. "Not for a very long time," William told him. "Grandpa will be king for many years." "And then Daddy will be king," Charlotte said. "And then George," Louis added, poking his big brother. George smiled but looked thoughtful. The coronation had shown him more clearly what his future would be. But that was many years away. For now, he was just a 9-year-old boy going home after an exciting weekend. As Kensington Palace came into view, the children perked up. Home meant normal routines, their own toys, and less time having to be on their best behavior. "School tomorrow," Kate reminded them. The children groaned a little, but they were also excited to tell their friends about the coronation. The car drove through the gates of Kensington Palace. Their royal weekend was over. They had been part of history, but now it was time to be a family again.